Oh my God. Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I am Isabel Núñez. I would like to thank you all to be here with me. It's a great honor to present my works with so many coral experts and restoration practitioners and also traditional owners. I did my PhD at the Future Reef Group at the University of Technology of Sydney. And today I'm going to talk about one of my chapters, which is about applying a multi-tray approach to evaluate success, in this case looking at carbonate batches and other characteristics beyond survival and growth. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and sea country in which I did my research. And I'm going to try to pronounce this, the Jidinji, Kuganji, Irakanji, and Gugujalangji, and pay my respect to those leaders, past, present, and emerging, and also extend my respects to the traditional owners that are in the room. And well, as you are aware, reefs worldwide are suffering many threats. This image is from 2022. However, we know that this year we have a very big mass bleaching event worldwide. And so far, the Great Barrier Reef has suffered 7 events of mass bleaching. And we also know that frequency, intensity, and severity of marine heat waves is increasing. And when we have coral bleaching, this is how it looks like. The symbiosis between the coral, the animal with the algae breaks down. In this stage, the coral still is alive, it can feed, but if some temperatures are still warm enough and they don't decrease, then is when we start to see reef decay. So the coral die, and there is this microbial biofilm that starts to cover the skeleton of the coral, and then is when we start to see decay, when we are losing reef framework. So we are not only losing biodiversity, but also the actual structure of the reef. And when we lose the structure of the reef, we are losing also many, many ecosystem services, such as those related to tourism and recreation. Coral reefs, they play an important role in the biochemical cycling of nutrients. We also know that they harbor a quarter of the marine species. The coral reefs are also very important for coastal communities that depend on these food resources. And also these communities, they are very dependent on these reefs for the protection of their shorelines. And as well, we have a lot of, as you know, coral reefs are a great place where to find new potential pharmaceuticals for the future. And all of these ecosystem services and many more are currently projected to be declined. And not only these ones, but also the cultural and spiritual value of the reefs. I tried to find literature on this, but apparently it's evident, but it's not evident in the literature. And I work with communities in the South Pacific, and their connection with the sea and the reef is very important to them, and it still is not kind of acknowledged, and sometimes it's overlooked. And so all these situations have led to a new way of managing the reef nowadays worldwide. And so there are different kind of strategies. There are some of that are targeting at the global scale in the sense to decrease carbon footprint and also reduce the greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. We also have some strategies at the shoreline where they look more at how to catch this pollution and this nutrient through catchment areas. And more we have all this active intervention using different kind of structures and strategies. So we have coral tree nurseries, we have different frames, ropes. And so which is the grand challenge for restoration? So in my research was about evaluating how these interventions can sustain or restore ecosystem service. And so far, we only look, or many of us look, at survival and growth rates, which are very, very important metrics, but we need more. Because ecosystem service many times is not well captured in these 2 metrics, and therefore there is a need to bring new metrics and how when we intervene, if the ecosystem services is sustained, as I say, or restored, which is the long-term objective of restoration. As I say, survival and growth metrics doesn't give us enough information about the coral performance during restoration interventions, but also during the planting stage, and doesn't tell us all the information regarding future reef resilience and the current functioning of the reef. As well as they don't capture potential trade-offs between trades. And so therefore, this is why I advocate for the use of more trade-based approaches where we apply multi-trade analysis, looking at more traits, more characteristics beyond survival and growth rates. And my research took place in this context. There were Mars efforts, and still ongoing Mars efforts on the Great Barrier Reef, and they specialize in a technique that focuses on substrate stabilization through the Mars-assisted restoration system or reef stars. And experimental design, so I'm happy because we are in Cairns, so this experiment took place here, just 50 kilometers off the shore in Moore Reef. And there were three sites. So we have the positive control site, which is a representative reef patch on this area. We have the negative control site, which is an area with rubble. This rubble was created in 2011 because cyclone JC hit. And at the time of this research, which was 2021, so 10 years later, still this rubber patch was still there. And we also have the experimental site. So this is 2,000 square meters of area that was intervened. And there were 87 at that time reef stars that they were installed. And they were seeded with branching and corymbose and plating forms of corals, corals of opportunity that were found there. And there were 2 time points. I had access to the reef in February 2021, so this means 6 months after the installation. Due to COVID, we couldn't be there at the beginning, and then 1 year later. So the methods, I measured 35 traits. I will show some of them. We apply the reef budget methodology, which consists of different surveys. So we have benthic surveys, that very unique surveys that you have to measure every benthic class below the transect and measure the surface area. We have also where we look at all the benthic classes, corals, crustose algae, and other kinds of microborers. Then we also did fish surveys focusing on parrotfish, and we also look at urchins. So we also perform urchin surveys. Usually this reef budget is, they look at that and it's very good methodology, but I wanted to look other characteristics to see if there were trade-offs. So I look at the skeletal properties of 3 dominant coral classes. So in this case was Posilopera damicornis, which was very common in the area, in the rubble patch and in the reef. We also look at Acropora intermedia, very dominant species in the area as well. And because Acropora intermedia wasn't in the rubble patch, I had to take as an equivalent, and this was a branching Acropora rubble, because there were no presence of Acropora intermedia there. And so we start with survival and growth rates. As you can see, I look at 3 different growth rates. They all grew, sorry. And we had 100% survival success. Wanted to say here that when you look at the growth rates, because we arrive at 6 months later, we didn't catch this big increase in growth rates. This is how tricky is growth rate. Depending on what time you arrive, you can catch a big growth rate or a shorter growth rate. So this probably was higher at the first 6 months. And this, of course, we assume probably is because of the optimal reef environment where, of the restore site, where the reef stars were installed. When we look at coral cover and rugosity, So here you have positive control, which is the reef, negative control is the rubble, and E is the experimental site or reef stars. So again, we can see there was a higher coral cover in the restored site, so the big bar in the first graph. We also have a higher rugosity in the restored site. And again, we assume that this probably is because these reef stars are doing well in the restored site. I'm going to go quickly. But when we look at the carbonate buckets, okay, if we look at the middle image, we have a gross carbonate production at the reef stars. However, the gross bioerosion, was similar across sites. And this, if you go to the first image, you can see that the net carbonate budget was positive in the restored site and negative in the rubble site, meaning that with this intervention, we could regain this carbonate budget again. Then we look at the skeletal properties, and there I look at several skeletal properties, and one of them that I found a trade-off was hardness. And so I detected a reduced hardness in Poecilopora damicornis in the reef stars, which I didn't detect with Acropora. And I think it's just because there are too many Acroporas, and Poecilopora doesn't do well surrounded by so many Acroporas, but also the niche, the environment there also changed and is less favorable for Poecilopora. Conclusion, here is the paper was published, if you want to check it. Carbonate batches, we consider this trade as a trade that is more aligned to ecosystem services, and we advocate for look at this trade when you are evaluating success of restoration. We also believe that, as you saw, the substrate stabilization through this technique increases carbonate budget on a degraded site that was already 11 years without showing any kind of recovery or very slow recovery. We also showed that this carbonate budget was higher on the restored area compared to the nearby reef, so the natural, healthy-looking reef. And we think it's because of competition between a space and a species. So in a reef that is already in a later stage and is well established, there is no room to grow. There is no space to grow, and there is more species competition. But also the life stage. We use, in the reef, you have very adult colonies that perhaps are putting more efforts in reproduction, not towards growth. But then in the restored area on the reef stars, we take fragments that are putting more energies in growth. So life stage or size also makes an impact here. We also find that this technique increased the rugosity, the complexity as well. And again, this is aligned with another ecosystem services, that is habitat provision for other organisms. As you saw, when looking also at other traits, skeletal traits, we can detect trade-offs, and we can refine the success of our intervention. And there are other many ecosystem services and traits that you can look at that I know that Mars is also studying this, such as invertebrate diversity, fish productivity. And lastly, well, to say that, of course, this intervention was in more reefs, so we need to be careful when giving recommendations, because one reef, one technique can work, another reef, it's different. But in general, I would say that this Mars substrate stabilization technique was great in promoting this reef accretion in a place that was shown that in 11 years didn't recover naturally. And so in this case, we can say that we have regained these ecosystem services, the carbonate batches that is related to wave attenuation. And so I would like to thank everyone for listening to my talk.
We got time for one question before lunch.
Thank you, Carmela. I'm really interested because there's a similar Mars restoration intervention in Indonesia, and there's been a few papers showing similar results. Have you compared yours with theirs? And the other related question is, they also looked at complexity as one of their ecosystem services, and also found that it had increased. And I was curious how you measured complexity or rugosity.
Yes, so the paper that you're referring about carbonate batches was recently released. So I published this before this was released, and they look at the long term. Mine it was shown that in 1 year we regain this. So it's different approach. I look at the very immediate success and they look at the long term. Both are good. Both are showing that the carbonate batches can be regained. And there are other articles from Mars efforts which they look at other kind of traits such as they look at the acoustics, they look at especially acoustics, I think, and also diversity of invertebrates. So they are looking at other traits. And the second question was? How you measure complexity? Rugosity, well, through this technique, when you do the transect and you are measuring each individual benthic class below the transect, you have a spreadsheet that you can add the numbers. And so it measures directly the rugosity. Yeah, so rugosity informs about complexity, but of course there are other traits that can also inform about complexity. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Camilla.
Thank you.